It's a little bit rainy on the outside, but at least it's not hazy, right? Today is actually special. I'm outside of the house. Well, yeah, I mean, it's not so special because I'm outside of the house, as much as it is what I'm going to be doing outside the house. So, the guys from Illegear, right? Let me just walk to my car first. The guys over from Illegear got in contact with me, and they told me, Yang, we really like the video that you did for us with the Raven SER. And so, we would like to invite you in because we've got something that we'd like to show you, and maybe you'd like to review that as well. So, I'm about to drive over and have a look at what they have for me. Oh my god. Wow, I'm so overexposed. Expose me! That's better. Yeah. It is so difficult to find parking in this place. Oh my freaking god, I went all the freaking floors. And now I'm parking in some reserved space. Hopefully I don't get clamped. But let's go find out what Illegear has in store for us. Alright. But before I go on to revealing how the laptop actually looks like, how about a little B-roll? So here I am back again with another review of another Illegear laptop. Illegear saw the review that I did of their Raven SER and asked me if I'd be interested to review their latest Laguna SE, and so on the 1st of October, I met up with Ryan and Sean from Illegear and they handed me this guy. Well, I don't have the laptop with me. Yeah, the laptop for review. This is just a loan unit, by the way. I don't get the laptop for free, and this review is still going to be unbiased and 100% of my own unadulterated opinion. Yeah. Anyway, back to the laptop. I was admittedly a bit hesitant to do so at first because, come on. I mean, how different can two laptops from the same manufacturer be, when they're months apart, right? I'm here to say that well, they're actually a bit different. And different enough along with some things better, some things worse. So let's get into the review and find out more about the Laguna SE. So first things first, given that it's another laptop from Illegear, I kinda assumed that the base or ODM of this laptop is also from Tongfang, but I wouldn't be correct. Instead, this time around they've gone with Quanta, in particular the Quanta NLCA, and that is actually really interesting because Quanta is actually one of the biggest, if not the biggest ODM in the world for brands like Alienware, Aorus, HP and Lenovo, just to name a few, and those guys make pretty solid laptops. So maybe this shares some of that DNA as well. Let's do things a little bit differently this time around though by skipping the pleasantries and going straight into a teardown, shall we? I genuinely had difficulties opening the chassis of the laptop. The bottom panel was really firm and secure onto the body of the laptop itself, so yeah, we're seeing the first signs of really solid build quality, perhaps because it's made by Quanta. Just like the Raven SER, we get an Intel Core i7-9750H 6-core 12-thread processor that obviously comes with an Intel HD Graphics 630, but more importantly, this time around this laptop can be kitted with a 1660 Ti right up to a Nvidia Max-P GTX 2070. Did I say GTX? I meant RTX. And that's the version that I have with me here today, by the way. And if you're unfamiliar with the Max-P naming scheme, that just means that it's a full fat RTX 2070, similar to the desktop chips and not a cut down chip like the Max-Q. If you saw my teardown of the Raven SER, you'll also notice that this laptop has more heat pipes than the Raven, And you'd be correct, it actually has 5, 6 if you include this mini one, which is 2 more than what you're getting with the Raven. You also get not just 1, not just 2, but also 4 more exhaust ports on this laptop, as this laptop not only has 2 more extra vents on the side, but 2 more on the top, which we'll look at later. To help keep the system cool as well, Illegear uses Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut to thermal paste their laptops so they don't cheap out on thermal compounds. Anyway, moving on, the configuration that I have here also comes with 2 sticks of 8GB DDR4 memory that comes to a total of 16GB, but if you wanted to, you could also jack that all the way up to a 32GB. Again, the configuration that I have here has 512GB of NVMe SSD storage. That is unbranded, but based on my experience with the Raven SE-R, it works just fine. You could also add in a second M.2 SSD if you wish, as it does have a slot for it. This time around though, there isn't an empty slot for the 2.5-inch hard drive, as Illegear has also thrown in a Seagate Barracuda Pro 1TB that runs at 7200 RPM, which means that it should make for a pretty darn fast storage or backup drive. I honestly still remember the days when we had to deal with 5400 RPM drives. We also see an Intel 9560 Wi-Fi and Bluetooth networking card here, and a much larger 64Wh battery in an interesting L shape that should help give a better battery to the laptop, but we'll check that out later. And finally here, well, kind of disappointingly, we find the same 2 2-watt speakers that we also saw in the Raven. So yeah, I'm not exactly expecting great things from this laptop sound-wise. Anyway, now that we are done with that, let's have a look at the laptop externally, starting with something that we can actually see, no pun intended, the 15.6-inch IPS LCD display at 144Hz 1080p that is made by BOE and is calibrated by Illegear out of the box for a nice 100% sRGB color gamut. There's still no FreeSync or G-Sync though, so yeah, there's that. The webcam is just above that display, and also unsurprisingly it still looks pretty bad, but this time around there's this weird kind of jitteriness that is going on. But that error seems to be fixed by plugging the laptop into the power source. But at least this time around there's a white LED that lights up next to the webcam to let you know that it's in use, so that's a nice little privacy feature right there. The other thing that I like about the display is that this time around it's actually constructed of anodized aluminum with the Illegear logo, this time in gold, and these gold accents that not only look cool, but they light up when the laptop is on and when the screen is open. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. You know what else is really cool though? This is the one-handed lid opening test, and it passed it with flying colors, which basically means that the laptop screen hinges are tuned so that they're not too tight so as to pull the whole entire laptop with it when opening the screen, and that's pretty cool because you can't do this with the Raven. It also has a much smoother and gentler opening and closing action that just feels good, so that's something that I like as well. It is not just the lid of the laptop though that is made of aluminum, but also the rest of the laptop, save for the bottom, which is great because one of the concerns that I had about the Raven was the plastic materials used and the possibility of it wearing down over time and looking, well, shiny. Unfortunately though, just like the Raven, oil marks still show up easily on this surface. Right below the display, you'll find the 2 extra vents that I talked about earlier, flanking each end, adorned with some pretty nice looking gold trims, together with what looks like some intake holes moving towards the center, and right smack in the middle is the power button in the center, which, forgive me if this kind of looks like a homage of Ultraman Great's health thingy in the center. Also because it lights up orange in the center when the laptop is turned on, much like Ultraman, except when he's in trouble. Looking further down, there's a full-sized keyboard complete with a numpad, which is nice, and the fan turbo button has actually moved to the right of the numpad as well, so that it doesn't exactly sit next to the power button like before, which I think is a welcome aesthetic change. The keyboard is also RGB backlit, as you may have already noticed, but the one thing that I find that it does worse compared to the Raven is the lighting. The backlight on the keyboard doesn't really get as bright as the Raven's, and sometimes it's really hard to notice its effects in broad daylight, even with the brightness turned all the way up. In terms of my typing experiences, if you've watched my previous video about the Raven, you remember that I complained about the keyboard being a lot more stiffer and needing a lot more force to actuate. Well, I'm happy to say that this isn't the case here. The keys on the Laguna SE are much more nicer and softer to type on, making for a much more pleasant typing experience with even less key wobbling compared to that of the Raven. I also like how, just like on my ZenBook previously, the home, page up and page down and end buttons are on the arrow keys, as it makes it just a lot more intuitive to use, especially on a compact keyboard. Aside from that, there's little to no flex when pressing the keyboard down, and the keycaps feel much nicer to touch, as if they're made from a different grade of plastic. And if you're a gamer, rejoice, because the WASD keys are highlighted in a way that is a translucent square around the letters, so yeah, you can find them easily. If I had to complain about anything though, as a programmer and as a power user, I don't like how small the backslash key is. The touchpad has a nice gold trim around it and uses the Windows Precision drivers, which means that moving around and tapping is actually pretty nice to use, but it's pressing on the touchpad that feels a bit strange. There's a bit of looseness and wobble to the touchpad near where the physical left and right keys are, which give it a bit of rattle. But other than that, they do have a nice tactile press and sound to them. This time around though, there isn't a corner to double tap to lock the keyboard, as it's now a keyboard combination of function escape. The one thing that I don't understand though is why the touchpad is shorter vertically, as clearly it has enough space to be taller, because yeah, this odd design makes it such that in order to reach from the top to the bottom of the screen, I actually need an extra swipe. Now, I don't usually talk about the front of the laptop, but this time around I'll make an exception because it actually has LEDs here. Well, it's more towards the edges than the front of the laptop itself, and these LEDs are configurable in the software suite, which I'll get to that later. Moving to the side of the laptop, starting with the left, strangely enough, it is exactly here where you'll find the power and hard drive LED indicators. You know what, for the power indicator, sure, fine, whatever, I get it. I mean, it's kind of redundant since the power button itself kind of lights up. So this isn't needed at all, but a hard drive activity indicator? I honestly can't remember the last time I've seen one of these. Aside from that, you'll get an SD card slot here, albeit a micro SD slot, which is a bit of a shame since the form factor does allow for a larger card slot. There is also a USB 3.0 port here, nice. A Ethernet port that lights up when the cable is plugged in. Okay, cool. Unnecessary, but cool. And speaking of cool, a venting hole as well. See what I did there? Hehe. Things get a lot cooler to the right because there is another vent here. And two more USB 3 ports. Nice. And a headphone/microphone jack. Finally, we'll move to the back where I'll stop making jokes about things being cooler, even though there's actually two more vents here. Aside from those, you have a port for the Kensington lock, a power port, a HDMI port, a mini display port, and a USB Type-C port, which unfortunately still is not Thunderbolt. The strange thing is that you'll find the laptop charging indicator here, neatly tucked away and out of sight. I honestly would have just combined this with the power button in such a way where the power button would change colors based on the status of the laptop, like maybe blue for charging, orange for normal, a pulsing red for low battery. But I don't know that, that's just me. Anyway, on that topic of power and charging, the power brick is made by Chickeny and is larger and heavier than that of the Raven at 920 grams. But I guess that's not really surprising since this laptop has a larger battery and hardware that sucks more power. Back to the laptop, it too is slightly heavier and larger than the Raven. In fact, using the laptop, it actually felt a lot chunkier despite being only 1mm thicker, and it turns out it's because the display lid is actually slimmer than that of the Raven. It is definitely heavier though, and weighing it myself, it came up to 2.22 kilograms. It might be because of the larger battery though, because Illegear does state that if you're choosing the RTX 2070 option, you'll get a larger battery. Anyway, the laptop still looks quite good overall, and it's definitely a lot more gamery looking than the Raven, but yeah, I still think it looks good without being too overdone. I like how they use the gold trim accents around the laptop as well, as it really contrasts nicely to the matte black finish. Finally, getting into the software of the laptop itself. If you're not that interested, you can always just skip ahead, as usually the only thing pre-installed is Illegear's own software, except for this time around it's not the Illegear Command Center, but rather the Control Center. The first tab, which is System Information, gives you plenty of the laptop's information at a glance, though strangely I did find that the CPU clock speed values don't seem to tally with MSI Afterburner or what hardware monitor is showing. System mode is the next tab, in which you can set the power settings of the laptop. By the way, you can also disable the Windows key here if you wish. LED control allows you to tune the RGB settings of the keyboard via zones A, B and C, and the two lights at the bottom front of the laptop to your liking, which is called ambient, though that can only be set to either red, green or blue. In terms of modes here, while I did find it easier to use, I did find it lacking in settings that I liked, say rainbow keyboard or being able to tune the transition speeds, and this latter part is a bit of an issue because the lighting animation on this keyboard just looks a bit stuttery and not so smooth at all. So I would just recommend setting it to something like static. Keyboard brightness control here is controlled in 3 steps of high, low and off, so unfortunately it can't get any brighter. The last tab here is Key Macro, which sounds cool on the surface, but somehow is just limited to 3 games or applications, and honestly I find it a bit of a pain to use, as I found it a bit weird and clunky. Now, I did mention earlier that the fan control has now been relegated to just a keyboard shortcut, and that keyboard shortcut toggles the fan between normal and max. With that, I think it's a good a time as any to head into the usage of the actual laptop. While writing this review in a room temperature ambient of 29 Celsius, yes, I know it's hot as hell, welcome to Malaysia, the CPU set at about 47 Celsius for the package and the GPU at about 45 Celsius. The wrist and keyboard area set at about 33 to 34 Celsius respectively, and you could definitely feel the heat from the system, but it's not that uncomfortable. Here's a sound test on how it sounds like on idle as well. It's definitely a bit audible, but honestly nothing you should be really bothered by. By all means, I would class this as near silent. On my load of Insurgency Sandstorm with an ambient temperature of 30 Celsius, the GPU maxed out at 86 Celsius, where it never went higher than that, and the GPU core started to throttle from about 1300 MHz to 1215 MHz. Things heated up on the CPU as well, where it maxed out at 99 Celsius and ran at about 3.5 to 4 GHz. The wrist and the keyboard area started to heat up as well, with the wrist area coming in at about 36 Celsius and the keyboard with an average of 42 Celsius. The additional heat pipes and vents do seem to help, but it seems that the RTX 2070 together with the i7-9750H may just actually be saturating its thermal dissipation powers. Things improve, however, when I changed the fan speed from normal to max. The GPU temperatures dropped 10 Celsius to about 76 Celsius, while the CPU dropped substantially to 77 Celsius. The wrist and keyboard area dropped temperatures too at 34 and 37 Celsius respectively. During this time, the CPU boosted all the way up to 4.1 GHz and the GPU boosted all the way up to 1830 MHz, maxing out at 1845 MHz. So the numbers look really good, right? But despite the benefits, I don't suspect that many people will be running the fans at max speed when gaming, unless you have a really good pair of earphones, and here's why. At those noise levels, your neighbors may think that you're running a vacuum cleaner, or I don't know, maybe firing up a jet engine in your room. At least the gaming performance is good, however. Here are some FPS numbers for some games. On that note of gaming as well, the RTX 2070 inside this laptop does a lot better in VR compared to the RTX 2060 in the Raven, so if you're interested in VR gaming, this laptop would be a really good choice. You'd probably want to have the fan maxed out though to keep the FPS and frame time high. It's probably a good thing that you're going to be wearing headphones when you're gaming as well, because the speakers, just like before, aren't all that good, but at least they're a mild improvement over the Raven. Okay, so being a gaming laptop, you probably shouldn't expect much out of the battery life. Writing up this review, the laptop only lasted about 3 hours and 30 minutes, which is exactly what I expected out of it, unfortunately. So you probably don't want to be gaming on the battery. Let's wrap things up with the Laguna SE. The variant that I have here costs a chunky 7,098 ringgit or 6,744 if you're paying by cash. If you're opting to get the RTX 2060 instead, that'll set you back 5,998 or 5,699 if you're paying by cash. And if you're further stepping it down to the GTX 1660 Ti, that will set you back 5,299 or 5,035 if you're paying by cash. For comparison, the Raven SER with an RTX 2060 costs about the same as a Laguna SE with a 1660 Ti. The decision isn't really that clear-cut though, because yes, while you are getting the best specs for your money with the Raven SER, with the Laguna SE you're paying for a much more solid metal build, better cooling with more vents, a nicer keyboard in my opinion, and a few of those other aesthetic things like RGB and whatnot. What you end up choosing with ends up really on what you're looking for in a laptop. As for me though, assuming the RTX 2060 variant of the Laguna is exactly the same weight as well, I would still probably stick to the Raven SER, and this mainly comes down to the fact that it has a full-sized SD card slot. I use it a lot and it's important to me, but that's the thing, I'm a creator and I'm a traveler, so for me picking the Raven is just what works best for me. If you are, however, more of a stay-at-home type of gamer looking to replace a desktop, or maybe a student moving from class to class who also wants one of the best gaming laptops out there without breaking the bank, then I really think that the Laguna SE should definitely be on your shortlist. I'd like to give a big thanks to Illegear for lending me this laptop to review. No, I don't get to keep it as I said before, but it was a lot of fun checking it out. If you would like to get one for yourself, you can check out their website or visit their new showroom where you can check them out in person. And well, yeah, the place is just really cool as well. If you liked this video and found it helpful, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. Drop any comments down below or on my Twitter or Facebook. Share this video around. Hit the bell icon to get notified for when any videos go live. This is Yang the Tech Rodent, and well, I'll see you in the next video.